Hey everyone, this is the Property Podcast. This is episode 158. I am Rob B. With me is Rob D. And this week we're bringing you 5 things that we did to become better property investors.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us yet again this Thursday morning, or whatever time it is where you are. As Rob says, today we're talking about 5 things we did to become better property investors. We've also got a really interesting resource of the week, a big news story, and a bit of chat about the budget, but not too much about that, thankfully. Thankfully, we don't have to talk about the budget as much as we have done recently. So lots coming up. And Rob, I imagine that you are in the holiday spirit, or in fact, more than the holiday spirit.
Well, yeah, sort of. I'm in the working away from home in a nice climate spirit. Now, not many people get to feel that, Rob, because it's normally just you. But tomorrow, I'm leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again. Actually, I'll be back in 4 weeks. But I'm going to Portugal to work remotely for 4 weeks because I've done this for 3 years now and I've had to suffer through you in beautiful climates around the world, enjoying yourself. So I thought I need to have a piece of that. So I'm going to try it. 4 weeks in Portugal. We've got the teams in place in all the businesses. So why not? And exactly, why not? You do it. And for actually a lot of people, they can do it. I've got young children, but if you want to make it happen, I'm sure there's a way you can do it. Even if it's just a mini vacation or a mini breakaway, like 4 weeks, you can find that time in the year if you try hard enough.
Yeah, definitely. I can't believe it's taken me 3 years to win you over, but we got there. And I think you're going to absolutely love it. And just from a business point of view, it's really interesting as well, because I know this isn't just something where you woke up one day and then, I'm going to go to Portugal. This is kind of like a conscious thing where you've been putting the systems and the teams in place to allow that kind of flexibility. So it's really interesting from that point of view as well.
It is. But obviously you can't be outdone. So you're preparing to leave these shores as well.
Yeah, as soon as you told me that, I was on to Skyscanner. I was like, I can't have this. So I'm off to Granada in Spain for a little bit, which should be very nice indeed. Although there's a couple of things that I'm going to be having to pop back for. More on that later. Indeed,
I had to cut my trip short by a few days, but it was more than worth it. But before we talk about that, we just need to mention the budget. And I use the word mention because not a lot happened. The only notable thing that happened with regards to property was capital gains tax. So for those who like to flip, not so good news. Capital gains tax was reduced for the majority, but not for property investors, unfortunately. I imagine a lot of people who do flip properties will go through a company instead. So they charge corporation tax rather than capital gains. And that's coming down to 17%, which seems good news on the surface as well. So not a lot happened in generally. Not a lot happened with property. I possibly gave the Chancellor a little bit more credit than he needed because before the budget, I said to a few people privately that I wouldn't be surprised if he watered down slightly the changes to property to seem like the good guy. But no, he's not that clever. So it's all as was. Everything we talked about the changes before remain the same. Capital gains, little change there, which will affect people who flip. But if you move into a company, not as harsh. But really, Rob, unless you like fizzy drinks, not a lot to talk about.
No, quite a relief. I think I've been conditioned to be fearful now, and so sort of watching it, I'm just kind of waiting for him to stick the knife in, but it never came. It was fine. The one thing that is sort of notable is that the stamp duty surcharge, there was originally an idea that it wasn't going to apply to larger scale investors, but he said it's now going to apply to everyone across the board. So the figure of 15 properties was banded around. It was never very clear. My interpretation of it was always that it had to be 15 properties in one transaction. Other people interpreted it as if you had a company that owned more than 15 properties, you wouldn't have to pay the higher rates on future purchases. So I wasn't distraught to see it going away because I thought it was something different from what other people thought it was anyway. But either way, not happening anymore. Everyone's going to have to pay this higher stamp duty across the board. But yeah, on the whole, not a great deal in there. So I think given recent announcements, we can take that as a victory. Nothing terrible happened.
Yeah, nothing. What a way to accept victory when nothing awful happens. That's a victory. But that's the Chancellor we have, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, just got political. Before we start losing listeners, left, right and centre, let's bring them back with some brilliant news, Rob. We've been invited along to, drumroll please, Chris, the Property Investor Show.
Yep, this is the big property show, the biggest in the UK. It happens at the XL in the Docklands. It happens twice a year. We've been there before, but this is the first time that we're going to be going along as exhibitors, and not only as exhibitors.
No, of course, we're not just going to rock up, have a stand, hand out a few leaflets and go about our business quietly. No, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, of course you wouldn't expect that. We're going to make a bit of an impact. So, obviously, Rob and I will be there both days. The dates you need to mark in your calendar are Friday, the 15th of April, and Saturday, the 16th of April. So, Rob and I will be there both days, along with many of the meetup leaders. So, the meetups around the country, we've invited them along, and they are going to come along, many of them, so over the 2 days to be there as well. So, they'll be floating around the show so you can meet the meetup leaders. And, Rob, that's not all. The Friday, we're going to be interviewing different people throughout the day. But then on the Saturday, things really hot up.
Yep, on the Saturday, 2 huge things are happening. So let's take it in reverse order. In the evening after the show, we're going to do what's probably going to be our biggest meetup ever. So everyone is welcome to come along. We're going to be inviting people along who come to the show itself. Even if you don't come to the show, you're still welcome to come to the meetup, but do go to the show. It's probably going to be the biggest meetup we've ever done. That is going to be huge. It's going to be really exciting. That's going to be at the venue itself. Also, the bit that I'm most excited about is on Saturday afternoon, we're going to be recording the podcast live on stage at the Property Investor Show. This is really exciting. It's not only the first time we've recorded the podcast in front of a live audience, it's also the first time we've recorded the podcast together in the same room. So it's terrifying on about a million different levels, but it's going to be amazing. You need to be there, and it's completely free.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's completely free. So yesterday, for those who get the emails from us, you would have got the first links inviting you along for free. So make sure you use the links we send you, because we'll send you a link for the Property Investor Show, which you can come along to free. The live podcast recording on Saturday afternoon, again, absolutely free. And then the meetup in the evening, straight after the show finishes, the largest meetup that we've ever done and ever probably will do is going to be after the show. Again, absolutely free. The live podcast on Saturday afternoon is limited though. We can only get 150 people in. They'll only allow advance tickets for the first 80 people. Then they allow people to queue on the day. So make sure you go now and get your ticket, because we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people who listen to the show and only 80 tickets that you can reserve in advance. And as they're free, I think they're going to go pretty quickly. However, don't fall apart. Don't cry if they have gone by the time you hear this. Go onto the Property Investor Show, get your free ticket, come along on Saturday afternoon and queue up, and you can see Rob and I make right fools of ourselves in front of 150 people for our first ever live podcast. So no pressure, Rob. It's not like we've got 2 or 3 people in front of us. We're going to have 150 people in that room listening to everything we've got to say, and with no editor. Now that's terrifying.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's bad enough when we have to do a webinar. We're not edited, but to actually have people looking at us at the same time. Oh my God. But let's move swiftly on and talk about how you get these tickets. Like Rob said, completely free and really easy to do. All you need to do is go to thepropertyhub.net/show. That is it. Go to thepropertyhub.net/show. On there, it will tell you exactly how to get your free tickets for the event, and your free tickets for the meetup, the free tickets for the podcast. A whole lot of free in there and a whole lot of exciting stuff. We should probably move on to our topic of the week, Rob, because we could just enthuse about this for ages, but it's not going to be that interesting for everyone else.
No, it's not. But thank you to the Property Investor Show for inviting us. We are really, really excited about this. Everything we're doing in the show is free, as we mentioned. So we're super excited. We'll pause for now. I'm sure we might mention it in the future. But for now, if you can make those dates, don't delay. Go and get those tickets. thepropertyhub.net/show. But you're right, Rob. Our topic of the week. And it's 5 things we did to become better property investors.
Yeah, and property investment is very much something that I think you kind of get a handle on over time. It's when you start, it seems really huge and really complex. And obviously, we've done a lot to try and break it down for people. But someone said to me recently, which I thought was interesting, that it's one of those things where you can't really take baby steps into it. and you can't do that much in advance because property purchases are pretty big. And so you can't just dabble like, you could buy like £100 worth of shares and see how it goes. With property, you can't really do that. At the start, it seems really scary and really complex. There's lots of decisions to make. We've talked about analysis paralysis. Starting is really hard. But then once you have started, over time, you pick up a lot of information and you learn a lot of strategies. You change in a lot of ways that make it easier and make you more successful. We've also said in the start how the first deal you do is very rarely your best because you do learn over time. So we thought it would be useful today to talk about 5 specific things that we did to become better property investors. So let's do exactly that. And Rob, you're going to go first. So let us know what your first one is.
Okay, number 1 is I got really clear on what I wanted. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, before I got clear on what I really wanted, I would look at deals. I would look at anything that would sparkle and get distracted and waste time. Even though I had a vague idea of what I wanted, because the allure of an interesting deal would come along, I would get distracted and I would be drawn into things that potentially weren't right for me. They could have been good deals, but not necessarily right for me. This happened a long time ago for me, and that's why I talk about goals so much. But when I got very clear on the goals, the long-term ambitions I have for property, that then dictated to me the strategy I should be undertaking, and therefore the investments I should be making. And now, yes, of course, I'm only human. A deal may cross my path that has absolutely no relevance to me and my particular strategy. I quickly put it down as time for procrastination. I know early on, I make a mental trigger that this isn't for me, but if you want to waste 10, 15 minutes, that's fine. You can do it your time. Have those weird conversations with myself and then I'll move on. But what I don't do is I don't make wrong investment decisions. I have a very clear criteria on the type of properties I'm investing in and actually the areas I want to invest in as well. So by getting very clear on what I want, it allows me to become a far more effective investor. So many people I meet at meetups and other places and in the office or at the summits, wherever I meet people who are interested in property, so many people are fixated on deals and I ask them why and how does that fit into the bigger picture. More often than not, I get blank faces, and that's because people haven't got clear on what they want.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think I'm still a little bit prone to distraction, but nowhere near as much as I used to be. But to be fair, I haven't looked at an HMO in quite a while. That was always my distraction. It's just like, oh, look at the gross yield on that. But no, it's really, really important. And everyone who I meet who seems to be the most successful, including the people I interviewed for my book, Beyond the Bricks, are the people who just know exactly what they want to do. They found a way of doing it and they just keep on doing it over and over again. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that's made a big difference for you.
Okay, so next one, and this is definitely one for both of us, is outsourcing. When I started to outsource pretty much every aspect of my life, things improved because it allowed me to concentrate and focus on the things that I do best. And it's exactly the same with property. I don't particularly like property management. I have a property management company with Rob called Yellow Lettings, but I don't do the property management. And I've never done it with my own portfolio. So even before Yellow Lettings, I didn't manage my own properties. It's too much hassle, takes too much of my time. I'm not really interested. It's not because I'm a Grinch and I don't like people. It's because it doesn't suit my skill sets and it doesn't really interest me. But it goes beyond that as well. Because I built up a network of sources, they were the people who introduced me to the deals. So I didn't have to be the person going knocking on doors, calling cold and trying to build relationships that way. I skipped that phase and just researched the deals, which I much prefer, analysing them, looking at the data and making a decision that way. So I outsourced 2 key aspects of my property investment journey, and it's massively improved my experience with property and also other areas of my life. In business, and property is a business, the first time I outsourced something, I noticed a difference. And if you apply that to property or any aspect of your life, somewhere that you're not particularly strong at or dislike doing, I promise you it will make a huge difference.
Yeah, it won't come as a surprise to you, Rob, that I completely agree. It's something that has really made a big difference for me over the last couple of years. And I quite enjoy thinking back to the things that I was doing a year ago that I don't have to do anymore, but they still get done. It's a really nice feeling. And more recently, over the last month, actually, there's something that I've started doing, which I found really useful. I've started doing a little evening review where I just take 5 minutes to kind of note what I've done today, what went well, what could have been better. And one of the questions that I ask myself is, what did I do today that I shouldn't have done or I didn't need to do? And that's been really useful because it's kind of flagged up all these things where I hadn't really thought about it, but it's like, oh, actually, yeah, why did I do that? Why did I fill in that form, or why did I call that person, or whatever it was? It just means that every so often I can have a look through and maybe think, who could this be passed to? Could a new role be created, or whatever it is? It's quite a nice little discipline to get into. But I've done it with property as well, outsourced a lot. And just when you think you can't outsource anymore, I'm now getting to the point where I'm hiring an assistant to kind of manage the tasks that I've outsourced to people. So I've got properties still with other letting agents, for example, because I haven't moved them to yellow yet because I'm either in contract or I feel loyalty or something. There's also things like progressing deals, chasing up solicitors. I really hate having to do. So I'm now hiring someone to manage all these kind of subtasks and outsource tasks. So it's kind of like another layer. So ultimately, the aim is to end up doing just what you do best and nothing else. And if you haven't started doing that yet, like Rob said, as soon as you start, you notice a difference. And it is quite an addictive process because you see the benefits so quickly.
We could definitely, and we probably have, and we'll probably do again, loads more on outsourcing because it has made a huge impact. Something else that I've not really talked about before, but has made a huge impact for me as a property investor, but then allowed me to do things like this, the podcast, and everything else we do, is I got really clued up on economics. Didn't read a book, really, really threw myself into it to understand how the economy works, how the wider economy works across the planet, because it allows me to see patterns, trends, invest more wisely, advise people. But let me give you a bit of background. It didn't just happen because I thought, I know, one day I want to study economics. When I entered property over 10 years ago now, we hadn't had the crash. And I came into it as a young adult and only seeing property rise. At the last crash in '89, I was a young person. I was still in primary school, so the impact of it hadn't really hit home to me. So when the crash came in 2008, that was big news to me. I just had this incorrect belief that property went up, and that was all there was. Now, it may sound daft now, but I wasn't alone. There were lots and lots of people in exactly the same boat. We just thought that you buy property, goes up in value, you make money. That was my belief system. So my world was rocked quite dramatically. My whole belief system was rocked quite dramatically that an industry I was in had just done something that I'd never expected to happen. And I really, really, really wanted to understand why. And from that point on, 2008 on, all I did was read up as much as I possibly could. And you want to see my bookshelf, book after book after book on economics and the crashes from the Great Depression, to see how history has repeated itself, and just really understand economics from a property level. Yes, of course, that's important, but more importantly, the wider economy, because that actually is what affects property in the end. That education, and it was self-education, but that education, those years, and I still do it now, I don't stop, I read up every single week on it, helps me make better decisions. Now, I can rattle off a few books and a few blogs you should be looking at. I'll do that, but rather than go through them now, I'll add them to the show notes, which you'll find at thepropertyhub.net/5 things. I'll recommend a few blogs and a few books to get you started. But if you're a property investor and you're in it for the long haul, you're mad not to look into this.
Yeah, definitely. If you are in it for the long haul, then whether you like it or not, the economy nationally and globally is going to affect what you do. And so it makes sense to know about it rather than be surprised about it. But Rob, I think what I'm always really impressed with when it comes to you and your economic knowledge is that you clearly know a lot, but you seem to understand the key concepts and see things quite clearly. The thing about economics is there's so much theory, and I studied it briefly, and there's theory and there's models, and a lot of it seems to be based on abstractions and doesn't actually apply to the real world. So you've clearly educated yourself a lot, but rather than getting bogged down in it, it's allowing you to see things very clearly and to go, oh, well, that's happening. So that pattern looks like that one that's happened before. Therefore, this is likely to happen, rather than going, oh, well, this model predicts that this should happen, but completely ignoring the actual reality of it. So you seem to have blended theory and reality in a very helpful way.
Well, we'll see. But so far, so good. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, well, number 4, which is the first one I'm going to talk about, links into that really nicely, which is the 18-year property cycle. Yes, I can hear people falling out of their chairs with shock that the 18-year property cycle was an important revelation for me, and I'm sure for you as well, Rob. We have done a lot on this, so if you are listening for the first time and you haven't heard us talk ad infinitum about the 18-year property cycle, episode 69, which we'll link to in the show notes, was an episode about that. It's also mentioned heavily in my new book. We had a magazine cover feature about it. We'll link all that up in the show notes. But the important thing about the cycle for me was a couple of things. First of all, it kind of showed that what happens isn't just random. So if you're paying attention to the media, it can often look like things are going up and things are going down and nobody really knows why. But in fact, when you look at the cycle, you can forget the 18-year part. That doesn't really matter. You can argue about how long the cycle is, but just look at it and go, oh, yeah, well, property is cyclical. And you can see where it's happened before. And you can see just by looking at the world around you where you are now. And it just means that you don't have to have all this fear around it because, like if you just look at the stock market and you read the headlines, it seems to be just going up and down and up and down, and you can feel a bit powerless. When you realize that the property market is cyclical, it means that, well, yeah, I can see what's happening. It's not suddenly going to plummet 70% tomorrow or shoot up and then come down again. It's going to happen in a predictable way. And also, at some point, if things seem to be going well, it's not going to keep going well forever. There is going to be some kind of correction. Therefore, I can prepare for it. And it just gave me a lot more clarity and confidence. And also, probably more importantly than that, it made a real difference to the kind of thing I bought and where I bought. Because the other thing is it shows you that there isn't a property market. There are multiple property markets. So the UK is obviously made up of lots of different cities. They'll all move at somewhat the same kind of pace through the cycle because they are subject to the same kind of national forces. But then there's so much other stuff going on as well. So you can get some cities that seem to be just ramping up for their boom, while others have already had it and maybe are plateauing or coming down a little bit. And also location within city and the property type is so important. Because if you look at the cycle, you'll see that certain types of property get the growth first and they get their growth fastest.
Absolutely. When I talked about getting clear on what I want, the 18-year property cycle is a big part of that. And it really, really has helped. And as Rob said, it really does link in to the economics of which you talked about before, because it is very, that's what it is. It's a cycle. It's an economic cycle. Now, it is not a blueprint. Rob said that, but just to repeat, it is not an exact science. And it's not a blueprint. And if you follow it exactly, you're going to cash out at the exact right date and make a load of money. However, there are patterns there and you can take a lot from it and learn a lot from it. And not just learn, but actually use it to your advantage and target areas just slightly ahead of the curve, which is exactly what we're both doing now.
Okay, then the fifth and final thing, something that I did to become a better property investor was get comfortable with risk. And risk is something that obviously people, when they're starting out, are very concerned about because, as I said right back at the start, it involves large amounts of money and you're subject to these broader economic forces that you don't really have any control over. That is a scary thing. And obviously, I'm somewhat comfortable with risk naturally because I invested in the first place. I've been self-employed and had my own businesses and all that kind of thing. But when it came to property deals, I always used to procrastinate a lot and only take deals that seemed absolutely flawless after researching them intensely. So I would do absolutely loads and loads and loads of research. And if I found any reason not to invest, then I wouldn't. Now, in a way, that was brilliant because I didn't make any mistakes. And everyone's always, when they're starting out, very scared of making mistakes that can be expensive. But the flip side of that was that I also missed out on a lot of opportunities. And in fact, if I'd been a little bit less cautious, then yeah, I would have made more mistakes, but those would have been more than cancelled out by the opportunities that I would have been able to take that would have performed really, really well. And that's something that I've got a lot better at. I've got a lot more comfortable with weighing up the upside and the downside and going, okay, well, what's the worst case? What could happen with this investment? What could mess it up? There's this little niggle that I'm having. What effect could that have? And then look at the upside. and ultimately realize that, if everything goes horribly wrong, there's always something you can do. There's always a way to get rid or find alternative use for it, or even if you have to hang on to a poorly performing investment, how long would that really be for? How much is that really going to cost you? And take more calculated risks. I don't know if there's any specific way that I did that. I think maybe it's just something that comes with time, but it definitely has made me a better investor just by being a little bit less overcautious than I used to be.
Yeah, and if you invest for the long term, the longer time frames you have with property, the less risk there is, but also the less you should, and it doesn't mean everyone does operate this way, the less you should be bothered by the smaller stuff. Because if you're in it for the long term, and now today you've got a tenant who's playing up, well, if you let an agent on top of it, why bother getting stressed? And anything like that can happen, whether a boiler breaks or something else. If you've got a cash flow, you've got money in reserve to pay for these things. That's what it was there for. That's why you put that pot away. You've got to let an agent who's managing the process. Don't sweat the small stuff. So many people do. But if you're in it for the long term, then all these things don't matter. Because if you had a conversation with yourself in 10 years' time, that person would tell you, remember when you got stressed about the boiler, or remember when you got stressed about the tenant? But look where we are now. You'd have a laugh together. So why not just avoid that altogether and just focus on the long term? Don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on the big stuff. Because the big stuff, the investment decisions, your long-term plans, that's what's going to make a difference. I think the longer term you go, the less risk occurs, and also the less you should be bothered by the things that can go wrong as well.
Yep, definitely. So those are 5 things that we did to become better property investors. There were a fair few resources mentioned in there. Those will all be in the show notes, which this week are at thepropertyhub.net/5things. And we'd also love to know what you've done to become a better property investor. So do get over to the Property Hub. If you're not a regular user of the Property Hub forum, then you really should be, because there's a load of amazing stuff going on in there. Link to that will be in the show notes as well. Get involved, share what's worked for you so we can all learn from each other.
I look forward to reading that thread. I also look forward, Rob, to the resource of the week and what we're going to record and talk about next week. But before that, we have a 5-star review in. And thank you to Lawrence, who says, the podcast has been so helpful, guiding and motivating me towards the first investment. The education provided has never been so important to become successful. I really appreciate the Property Hub, especially the free courses. Cheers, Rob and Rob. Well, Lawrence, our pleasure. It really is. And thank you for your 5-star review. We do appreciate it.
Yep, we really, really do. And as a small way of paying you back, we're going to have another resource of the week. This week's resource is the best commuter hotspots. And this is a tool. It's another interactive map. Gotta love it. From totallymoney.com. So the full link is going to be in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/5things. We featured resources like this before, Rob, but this is very nicely done. Basically, it shows you if you've been priced out of London, it shows you all the surrounding suburbs, and it gives you filters like travel time, how much the season ticket on the train costs, house prices and things like that. So you can filter down to areas where you might want to live, but from our point of view, where you might want to invest.
Absolutely. And I really like this. It's really pretty. As Rob, you said, it's not just on travel time, it's on disposable income, house prices, and they're all ranked. So you can see where your area comes in. Not doing so well are areas like Basingstoke and Leigh-on-Sea. Sorry, Gavin. And Bishop Stortford, not doing so well on the rankings. However, areas like your hometown of Watford, Rob, number 14, not doing too bad.
But arch rivals Luton are 13, so what can you do?
God, they've done you. Oh, well, let's move on.
And yeah, let's move on, because we could go on about this for ages. But it is really interesting. And if you are looking for somewhere that maybe hasn't gone as nuts as the rest of the place yet, but still has potential, somewhere to look at. So do get over to the show notes and check that one out.
Next week, we're going to cover how to invest, and we'll look at managing as well, property from afar or overseas. So how can you invest in property when you are not local to the area? So whether you're on the other side of the country, you're overseas, this one's going to be for you. And, well, Rob and I are going to be overseas, and hopefully our properties will still be managed and we'll still be assessing deals. So we're going to be doing it. So how? We'll explain next week.
Yes, we will. But before then, if you have not yet booked your tickets for the Property Investor Show, go do that right now. go to thepropertyhub.net/show. That is where you can get your free ticket for the event with all the cool stuff that's happening there, plus specifically our live podcast recording and our meetup in the evening. So we'd love to see you there at thepropertyhub.net/show.
Perfect. So we look forward to seeing you there. We look forward to being back with you next Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. And of course, the main event, the Property Podcast, next Thursday. But until then, everyone, have a wonderful week.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.